The dust-caked windows of Willow Creek's only general store revealed a woman with hollow cheeks clutching the hand of a small child who hadn't stopped crying for what seemed like hours. Tabitha Collins pressed her palm against her daughter's forehead, fear rising in her chest as the fever that had started that morning showed no signs of breaking. 3 days without proper food had weakened them both, and the meager coins in her pocket wouldn't buy enough to fill their empty stomachs. Wyoming Territory, 1874. Summer heat pressed down on the small frontier town, unrelenting and merciless as the circumstances that had driven Tabitha and her 5-year-old daughter Ellie this far west. The death of her husband 6 months prior had left them with nothing but debts and hungry creditors circling what little remained of their life in St. Louis. "Mama, my tummy hurts," Ellie whimpered, her voice thin and reedy. "I know, sweetheart." "We'll find something soon," Tabitha promised, though the words felt hollow. The journey west had depleted what little savings she'd managed to hide away. The promise of work as a seamstress in Sacramento now seemed an impossible dream, separated by hundreds of miles and empty pockets. As they lingered outside the general store, the sound of horses approached. A group of cowboys rode into town, dust clouds billowing behind them. They dismounted in front of the saloon across the street, laughing and jostling each other. One man stood apart from the others, taller, broader across the shoulders, his movements deliberate as he secured his horse. Tabitha quickly turned away, tugging Ellie toward the alley beside the store. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, but begging in the street was something she wasn't ready to do, especially not in front of her daughter. "Let's rest here a moment," she whispered, sinking down against the wall and pulling Ellie onto her lap. The child's body felt too light, too fragile. The sound of boots on wooden planks startled her. Looking up, she found herself staring at worn leather boots, then dusty denim, and finally into the face of the tall cowboy she'd noticed moments before. He stood at the entrance to the alley, blocking the afternoon sun, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "couldn't help but notice you and the little one. You look like you could use some help." Tabitha stiffened. "We're fine, thank you." The words came automatically, a reflex born from months of stubborn independence. The man's eyes, a deep blue that reminded her of the Missouri sky in autumn, studied her face, then Ellie's. He wasn't fooled. "Name's Dawson Reed," he said, crouching down to their level. "I run a cattle operation about 5 miles out of town." His gaze settled on Ellie, whose eyes had drifted closed from exhaustion. "When's the last time she ate?" The direct question broke through Tabitha's defenses. We've been rationing. A little bread yesterday morning," her voice caught. "I've been giving her most of mine." Dawson nodded, his expression grave but not pitying. "I was just heading to Mary's diner for supper, best food in 3 counties. He glanced at Ellie again, then back to Tabitha. "My table's big enough for you both." Tabitha hesitated, years of caution warring with desperate need. "No strings attached, madam," he added softly, as if reading her thoughts. Just one neighbor helping another, the kindness in his voice nearly undid her. "I'm Tabitha Collins. This is my daughter, Ellie." She swallowed hard. "Thank you, we'd be grateful." Dawson's face softened into a smile. He stood and offered his hand, helping her to her feet. As they walked toward the diner, Tabitha carried Ellie, who had roused slightly at the movement. Mary's diner was a modest establishment with checkered tablecloths and the rich aroma of home cooking. The owner, a plump woman with silver-streaked hair, greeted Dawson warmly before her eyes widened at the sight of Tabitha and Ellie. "Mary, these folks will be joining me," Dawson said, his tone suggesting it wasn't up for discussion. Mary's expression softened immediately. "Of course, best table by the window is yours." Once seated, Dawson didn't bother with a menu. "Bring us your chicken and dumplings, cornbread, and whatever vegetables you've got fresh, and milk for the little one." He looked at Tabitha. "That sound all right to you?" Tabitha nodded, overwhelmed by his easy generosity. Ellie had perked up at the mention of food, her eyes wide as she watched Mary bustle away. "Are you an angel?" Ellie asked Dawson suddenly, her small voice serious. Dawson chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. No, little miss, just a cowboy who remembers what it's like to be hungry. We're on our way to Sacramento, Tabitha explained, feeling she owed him something in return for his kindness. My husband Thomas passed away this winter. There wasn't much left after the debts were settled. Sorry to hear that, Dawson said, and she could tell he meant it. Sacramento's still a fair piece from here. I have a promise of work there, as a seamstress. She twisted her wedding band, the only valuable thing she had left. We just need to get there. Before Dawson could respond, Mary arrived with a pitcher of milk and glasses. Ellie's eyes lit up as Dawson poured her a full glass, which she drank so quickly that milk dribbled down her chin. Tabitha reached to wipe it away, embarrassed, but Dawson just smiled. Plenty more where that came from, he assured them. The food arrived soon after, steaming plates of chicken and dumplings, golden cornbread with butter melting on top, and colorful vegetables that made Tabitha's mouth water. She helped Ellie with her plate, cautioning her to eat slowly, though her own stomach clenched with hunger at the sight and smell. Eat, Dawson encouraged, breaking apart his cornbread. You need it just as much as she does. For a while, they ate in companionable silence, interrupted only by Ellie's occasional delighted exclamations. Tabitha couldn't remember the last time food had tasted so good or when she'd last seen her daughter's face so animated. As they finished their meal, Dawson spoke again. I've got a proposition for you, Mrs. Collins. He held up a hand when she tensed. Nothing improper. My ranch hands are good men, but they're living on my cooking, and I've got a house full of clothes and linens that need mending. He leaned forward slightly. I could use someone with seamstress skills, just until you've saved enough to continue to Sacramento. Room and board for you and your daughter, plus wages. Tabitha stared at him, searching for the catch. Why would you do this? You don't know us. Dawson's gaze was steady. My ma raised me to believe that a person's character shows in how they treat those who can't do anything for them in return. He glanced at Ellie, who was using her finger to get the last crumbs of cornbread from her plate. Besides, I've been meaning to hire help for some time. You'd be doing me a favor. Tabitha knew it wasn't entirely true. A man like Dawson could have hired help from town anytime he wanted, but the offer represented something she hadn't had in months. A chance to catch her breath, to rebuild some savings, to let Ellie recover her strength. I accept, she said finally. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Dawson, he corrected with a smile. Mr. Reed was my father. That evening, after settling their bill despite Tabitha's protests, Dawson arranged for rooms at the town's small hotel. We'll head to the ranch tomorrow, he said. Get a good night's rest. For the first time in months, Tabitha slept without worry gnawing at her edges, Ellie's breathing steady and peaceful beside her. The Reed Ranch was larger than Tabitha had expected, a sprawling property with a substantial main house, bunkhouse, barn, and corrals. Cattle dotted the distant hills, and a creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwoods. The house itself was well built but showed signs of needing a woman's touch. Curtains hung unevenly, mismatched dishware was stacked haphazardly, and while clean, the rooms had a sparse, utilitarian feel. It's not much to look at inside, Dawson admitted as he showed them to their rooms on the second floor. My mother had plans to make it proper, but she passed before much of that happened. It's wonderful, Tabitha said honestly. After months of uncertainty, the solid walls and sturdy roof felt like luxury. Ellie was already exploring, her energy returning after a night of good sleep and a hearty breakfast at the hotel. The room prepared for them was large and airy, with a bed for Tabitha and a smaller one that Dawson explained had been his as a child. We can fix up another room for Ellie if you'd prefer, he offered. This is perfect, Tabitha assured him. We're used to sharing space. The washrooms down the hall, kitchen's always open. He paused at the door. Make yourselves at home. I need to check on the herd, but I'll be back for supper. Mrs. Finch comes in 3 days a week to help with cooking and cleaning, but she's not due until tomorrow. After he left, Tabitha sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden turn in their fortunes. Ellie climbed up beside her, her small face serious. "I like Mr. Dawson," she declared. "He has kind eyes like Papa did." Tabitha hugged her daughter close. "Yes, he does." She wondered briefly about the absent Mrs. Reed but pushed the thought away. Their arrangement was temporary, a business transaction. Nothing more. Over the next few weeks, Tabitha settled into life at the Reed Ranch. She organized the kitchen, mended piles of clothes and linens, and began sewing new curtains from fabric Dawson purchased in town. Ellie thrived in the open spaces, following Dawson around whenever he was working near the house, peppering him with endless questions that he answered with remarkable patience. Tabitha learned that Dawson had inherited the ranch from his father 5 years earlier. He'd been running it alone since his mother's death 2 years ago. There had never been a Mrs. Reed in his life, though according to Mrs. Finch, several local girls had tried to change that fact. Too focused on this place to notice a pretty face, the older woman had confided while kneading bread dough. Shame, too, man like that shouldn't be alone. One evening in late July, as summer thunderheads gathered on the horizon, Tabitha sat on the front porch mending one of Dawson's shirts. Ellie had gone to bed early, tired from a day of helping Mrs. Finch make preserves. Dawson settled into the chair beside her, a cup of coffee in his hand. "You've made quite a difference around here," he said, gesturing toward the house. The new curtains billowed gently in the evening breeze, and flowers from the neglected garden Tabitha had revived sat in a jar on the windowsill. "It's the least I could do," she replied. "Your generosity saved us, Dawson." He was silent for a moment, watching the distant lightning illuminate the clouds. "Have you given any more thought to Sacramento?" The question caught her off guard. In truth, she'd been thinking about it less and less. Yes, of course." "Once I've saved enough, because there's no rush," he interrupted gently. "Winter will be here before you know it. Wouldn't be safe to travel then, especially with Ellie." Tabitha's hands stilled on her mending. "Are you asking us to stay through winter?" Dawson set his coffee cup down and turned to face her directly. "I'm asking you to consider staying, period." His voice was steady, but she could see tension in his shoulders. "You and Ellie belong here. You've brought life back to this place." Her heart quickened. "Dawson." "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he said quickly, "but I care for you both more than I thought possible." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from a man usually so composed. "I understand if Sacramento is still your plan. I just wanted you to know there's a place for you here, always." Tabitha looked down at the shirt in her hands, his shirt, worn and comfortable like the man himself. Over the past weeks, she'd come to depend on his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at Ellie's antics. She'd told herself it was gratitude she felt, nothing more, but sitting here in the gathering dusk, she couldn't lie to herself any longer. "Ellie asked me yesterday if we could stay forever," she admitted softly. "She's never settled anywhere so quickly." Hope flickered across his face. "And what did you tell her?" "That I didn't know." Tabitha set the mending aside and met his gaze. "But the truth is, I've been afraid to want it too much." Dawson reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers. "I'm not Thomas," he said gently. "I can't replace him, wouldn't try to. But I promise you this, as long as I'm breathing, you and Ellie will never go hungry or want for anything again." Tears pricked at Tabitha's eyes. "It's not about that, you've already given us so much." "Then what is it?" "I'm afraid," she whispered, "afraid to trust again. To build a life that could be taken away." Understanding softened his features. "Nothing's certain in this life, Tabitha, but some risks are worth taking." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight, just think about it." Before she could respond, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. They gathered their things and hurried inside, the moment suspended between them like the lightning frozen momentarily in the sky. That night, lying awake as rain drummed on the roof, Tabitha allowed herself to imagine a future here, Ellie growing up with space to run and explore, learning to ride the gentle mare Dawson had already begun teaching her on. And Dawson himself, his quiet strength beside her, his hand in hers, perhaps more children someday. The vision was so clear it startled her. When had this place, this man, become so deeply embedded in her heart, August brought scorching heat and the cattle roundup. Dawson was often gone from sunup to sundown, returning dust-covered and exhausted. Tabitha made sure hot meals awaited him, and Ellie appointed herself his special helper, bringing him cool water and chattering about her day until Tabitha gently reminded her that Mr. Dawson needed to rest. "It's all right," he'd say, even as his eyes drooped with fatigue. "Best part of my day listening to Miss Ellie's adventures." One evening, Ellie climbed into his lap without invitation, something she'd never done before. "Mr. Dawson," she said seriously, "do you like being a papa?" The question hung in the air. Tabitha froze in the act of clearing the supper dishes, mortified. "Ellie, I'm not a papa, little miss," Dawson answered carefully, his eyes finding Tabitha's across the room. "But you could be," Ellie persisted. "You do papa things. You fixed my doll and taught me to ride Buttercup and check for eggs without scaring the chickens." Dawson's expression softened. "Those are important things," he agreed solemnly, "and you make Mama smile again." She didn't smile for a long, long time after Papa went to heaven. Tabitha felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Ellie, that's enough, it's time for bed." Later, after Ellie was tucked in, Tabitha found Dawson on the porch smoking a rare cigarette. She sat beside him, the night air still warm around them. "I'm sorry about Ellie earlier," she said. "Children don't understand, children understand more than we give them credit for," he interrupted gently. "She sees what's happening here, even if we haven't put it into words." Tabitha's heart quickened. "And what is happening here, Dawson?" He extinguished his cigarette and turned to face her. In the moonlight, his features were etched with a certainty that made her breath catch. "I'm falling in love with you, Tabitha Collins. Have been since that day in town when you were too proud to ask for help but brave enough to accept it when offered." His voice was low, steady. "I'm falling in love with that little girl too, who sees the world with such clear eyes." Tabitha couldn't speak past the knot in her throat. "I know it hasn't been long," he continued. "I know you're still healing, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He reached for her hand, his touch warm and calloused. "I'm not asking for promises tonight, just honesty." The walls Tabitha had built around her heart since Thomas's death began to crumble. "I didn't come here looking for this," she whispered. "I know, but I can't imagine leaving now." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying at once. "When I think of Sacramento, it doesn't feel like home anymore. This does." Dawson's smile was slow and beautiful. He leaned forward, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "May I?" he murmured. Tabitha nodded, her eyes closing as his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as she responded, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing harder. "I should check on Ellie," she said, though she made no move to leave. "She's fine," Dawson assured her, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Stay a while longer." They talked late into the night, sharing stories they hadn't told before of Thomas's long illness, of Dawson's father's stern but fair guidance, of dreams they'd held and lost and found again. When Tabitha finally went upstairs, her lips still tingling from his goodnight kiss, she felt lighter than she had in years. September brought cooler temperatures and a visit from Reverend Parker, who rode out from town once a month to check on the outlying farms and ranches. After sharing a meal, during which the Reverend praised Tabitha's cooking effusively, Dawson asked to speak with him privately. When they emerged from Dawson's study, the Reverend looked pleased and Dawson appeared both nervous and determined. That evening, after Ellie was asleep, Dawson asked Tabitha to walk with him to the creek. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of autumn. "I've been thinking," he began as they stood by the water. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, comfortable enough now to joke with him. He smiled, but there was an underlying tension in his posture. "I spoke with Reverend Parker today." Tabitha's heart skipped. "Oh," asked him how soon he could perform a wedding ceremony. Dawson turned to face her fully, if the bride was willing. The world seemed to still around them. "Dawson," he took both her hands in his. "I know it hasn't been a conventional courtship, but nothing about us has been conventional from the start." His eyes held hers, earnest and hopeful. "I love you, Tabitha. I love Ellie. I want us to be a family officially, permanently." Tears welled in her eyes. "What about Sacramento?" "Sacramento will always be there if you want it, but I'm hoping you'll choose to build a life here instead. With me." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, producing a simple gold band. "It was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Tabitha looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, this good, steady man who had saved them with a simple offer of food and shelter, who had opened his home and then his heart, who loved her daughter as if she were his own, who had become, without her quite realizing it, the center of her world. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Dawson Reed, I'll marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slid the ring onto her finger. Then he was pulling her close, his kiss full of promise and passion. When they finally broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "We should tell Ellie in the morning," he murmured. Tabitha laughed softly. "She'll be insufferably pleased with herself. She's been dropping hints for weeks." "Smart girl," Dawson said, his arms tightening around her waist. "Takes after her mother." The wedding took place in early October, when the cottonwoods along the creek had turned golden. It was a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Reverend Parker officiating and the ranch hands, Mrs. Finch, and a few townsfolk in attendance. Ellie, dressed in a new blue dress that matched her eyes, proudly carried flowers from the garden Tabitha had revived. Tabitha wore a cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself, with lace Dawson had ordered specially from Denver. When he saw her walking toward him, his expression of wonder and love made her forget everyone else present. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, his voice carrying in the clear autumn air. Dawson's hands were warm around hers as they repeated their vows. When he slipped a second ring onto her finger to join his mother's band, his eyes never left hers. "With this ring I thee wed," he promised, his voice steady and sure. "You may kiss your bride," the Reverend announced, and Dawson did, amidst cheers and whistles from the ranch hands. The celebration afterward was joyous tables laden with food, fiddle music from one of the hands, dancing that continued into the evening. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Dawson found Tabitha where she stood watching Ellie twirl with one of the younger ranch hands. "Happy Mrs. Reed?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. The name still felt new but right. "More than I thought possible," she answered honestly, leaning into his embrace. Ellie spotted them and ran over, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mama, Papa Dawson." "Mr. Jenkins says there's going to be pie soon, Papa Dawson," he repeated softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I like the sound of that." Later that night, after the guests had departed and Ellie was sleeping soundly in her room, no longer sharing with Tabitha, husband and wife stood on the porch of their home, gazing at the star-filled sky. "I never thought I'd find this again," Tabitha admitted, nestled against his chest. "After Thomas died, I was so focused on survival, on providing for Ellie. Love seemed impossible." Dawson's arms tightened around her. "Sometimes life brings us exactly what we need, even when we're not looking for it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Like a stubborn woman and her hungry child appearing in town just when I was beginning to think I'd spend my life alone on this ranch." She turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "Thank you for seeing us that day, for offering us a place at your table when we needed it most." His eyes darkened with emotion and something else, something that sent heat curling through her. "Thank you for accepting," he murmured, before lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that spoke of the night to come. 5 years later, the Reed Ranch had prospered, expanding its operations and reputation throughout the territory. The main house had undergone transformations as well, more bedrooms added, a proper parlor, gardens that bloomed from spring through fall. But the heart of the home remained the large kitchen table where it had all begun. Around that table now sat an extended family, Dawson at one end, Tabitha at the other, 10-year-old Ellie beside her 3-year-old brother James and 1-year-old sister Catherine. Mrs. Finch, now a permanent fixture in their household, was passing around a plate of biscuits while regaling them with news from town. And Mrs. Parker says the new school teacher is ever so qualified, she was saying. Studied back east and everything. I still like Miss Wilson better, Ellie declared, reaching for another biscuit. She had grown tall and confident, excelling in the town school and already showing her mother's skill with a needle. Miss Wilson got married, sweetheart, Tabitha reminded her. Mrs. Hathaway now. James, a miniature version of his father with the same serious blue eyes, was more interested in the bowl of preserves than the conversation. Catherine, meanwhile, was busily mashing potatoes into her father's shirt sleeve, much to Dawson's amusement. I think someone's ready for her nap, he observed, wiping potato from his daughter's chubby hand. Tabitha smiled at the sight of her husband with their youngest. Parenthood suited him. He approached it with the same steady determination he brought to everything else, never flustered by midnight feedings or childhood mishaps. After breakfast, while Mrs. Finch supervised James and Ellie's lessons and Catherine napped, Tabitha found Dawson in his study reviewing the ranch accounts. She slipped in quietly, but he sensed her presence immediately, looking up with a smile that still made her heart skip. Need something, love. She closed the door behind her. Just you, she perched on the edge of his desk. Do you know what day it is? He leaned back in his chair, pretending to consider. Tuesday, she shook her head, smiling. It's been exactly 5 years since a hungry woman and her child met a kind cowboy in Willow Creek. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over the rings she wore. Best day of my life, he said simply, though our wedding day gives it strong competition. Mine too. She slid from the desk into his lap, her arms going around his neck. Thank you for stopping that day, for seeing us. Thank you for letting me help. His hands settled at her waist, for agreeing to stay. For giving me these beautiful children and this life I never imagined could be mine. They were quiet for a moment, foreheads touching, breathing each other in. I have something to tell you, Tabitha said finally, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Dawson's eyebrows rose. Oh. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. Come spring, we'll need to make more room at our table. Joy bloomed across his face. Truly, she nodded, laughing as he stood suddenly, lifting her in his arms and spinning her around. I love you, Tabitha Reed, he declared, setting her back on her feet but keeping her close. More every day, and I love you. She rose on tiptoe to kiss him. My generous cowboy with the big table. Outside the window, the land that had once seemed so foreign to her stretched golden under the autumn sun. The creek where they'd become engaged sparkled in the distance. The ranch hands moved about their tasks, voices calling to one another. And here in this room, in the circle of her husband's arms, Tabitha knew with absolute certainty that she was home. That night, as their children slept soundly and the house settled around them, Tabitha and Dawson lay tangled together, speaking in whispers of the future, of the child who would join their family, of all they had built together from that first meeting of hungry strangers and a kind cowboy with room at his table. From hunger to fullness, from solitude to family, from strangers to beloved, their journey had been unexpected but perfect in its way. And as sleep finally claimed them, Tabitha's last thought was one of gratitude for the hardship that had led her to Willow Creek, to Dawson, to this life overflowing with love.